Just inside the entrance to the temple, we find the Hall of Marchers. The perimeter of this hall is composed of 18 giant stone figures, each representing Ramses. Each has his left leg identically extended, as if taking a first step toward a destination. And while the rest of the temple is laid out along 2 straight axes from head to leg, this hall is not. Instead, it is skewed at an angle, the exact angle used in the extended left legs. Seen from above, it perfectly outlines a side projection of the royal figures marching. It is as though the temple itself is taking the same step forward. The entire emphasis of the hall is the forward leg, man in motion, living man.
The various parts of the temple correspond to the main articulations of the human body, and the symbolism of the friezes and the artwork, inscriptions and so on, we might call it a lesson in esoteric physiology, because the various parts of the body represent, in their own way, the various phases of genesis, of setting the whole universe into motion. So what does the lower leg do? I mean, the first step. So this is the part of the temple that is related to or consecrated to setting the whole thing into motion.
The marchers in the first hall of the temple each stand with left leg extended. This seemingly random feature has a symbolic significance which still influences temple and lodge rituals today. Observe the movements of any Freemason during a public ceremony. You'll notice without fail, when they move forward, they step off with the left foot. The origins of this practice are unexplained.
The hall symbolizes the movement forward into the world, of humanity in action, yet this was the final hall built. The adult goes forth into the world when physical growth is complete. At the site of the knees, just above the Hall of Marchers, the designers of the temple used another meticulously pre-planned technique for emphasizing one aspect of the hieroglyphic story told in the stones. This panel, for instance, depicts the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, with the Nile running between them. The stones have been cut so that the horizontal joint between the 2 layers of stone fall directly at the knee of both the pharaohs. Here, as in other parts of the temple, the graphical placement of joints between stones, which appears random, is in fact deliberate and meaningful. Schwaller came to realize that the joints could be just as significant as the images themselves. They serve as orientation aids in navigating the complex symbolic realm of the temple. The joints cross the section of the human form, corresponding to where they are located in the overall temple. This is one way that the masonry joints fine-tune the communication of the concepts being taught in that particular chamber. In some cases, they also serve to allow a story to continue across time. In one of the earliest chambers constructed, corresponding to the pituitary gland in the head, which controls growth, there is a figure of a royal child standing in front of the Persea tree, the tree of life. A horizontal joint cuts through above the eyes, another passes through the child's knee, and a third vertical joint isolates the child's left knee. This young pharaoh's figure is located near the pituitary region of the temple, like the upper horizontal joint in the image, and sure enough, hundreds of years later, the figure was repeated here at the knee of the temple, except that now the pharaoh in front of the tree has grown into mature adult. In this second Persea tree relief, a now fully grown king kneels in front of the tree, here at the knee point of the temple. In these two images, one from the earliest stages of the temple and one here at the next to last, we see the boy king grown to knowledgeable adult, and we see the teaching of the temple extending through time. Moving up the temple from the knee, we pass between twin statues of Amenhotep III and his wife. Here, in the hall corresponding to the femur, the leg bone above the knee, all of the reliefs are elaborate portrayals of celebratory feasts. These feasts follow the processionals from Karnak, the Temple of Life, in which a huge array of food offerings would be carried into the temple. Modern science knows the femur is responsible for the manufacture of most of the blood's red corpuscles which feed the body.
It's in the thigh, particularly in the marrow of the femur, most of the blood corpuscles are manufactured. You know, sort of the essential nourishment of the whole frame is produced in the femur.
We can see a relationship between the choice of this spot in the design of the temple and the depictions of offerings to the netters. These offerings can be seen as providing the spiritual sustenance to keep the entire enterprise going, just as our femur provides the physical nourishment required by the rest of our body.
And the same processes is being shown here. In other words, all of this processional stuff is leading up to the sustenance, spiritual sustenance of the entire enterprise, of the human frame. Because it's here that the marrow is being made. So it's not just festival, but it's festival with a much more profound esoteric significance that is at the same time absolutely in keeping with physiology.
In this frieze, the pharaoh has two right hands. This symbolic storytelling device is seen often at Luxor and throughout Egypt. For the Egyptians, the right hand gave and the left hand received. And so we know that in this dramatic depiction of esoteric metabolism, the pharaoh is offering the food, not receiving it. The section of the temple corresponding to the belly, and particularly the umbilical cord or navel, became a central test of Schwaller's interpretation of the temple. His biometric evidence strongly suggested that this hall must be related to the umbilical and to birth. Many Egyptologists were skeptical of Schwaller's revolutionary work, but one scientist, Alexandre Baril, maintained an open mind. In discussing this section of the temple, they agreed that if the temple were indeed modeled on an idealized male frame, the architrave stones atop the columns in the center of this hall were positioned precisely where one would expect the umbilical to be located. Schwaller felt that there must therefore be some hieroglyphic reference to birth on these heavily inscribed upper blocks. If there were no such references, then this would clearly raise grave doubts about his entire reading of the stones.
So they went to Baril, who was friendly with them, and asked him to translate that one particular architrave, because they felt that it was kind of central. If it didn't say something there about birth, the whole theory was suspect. It was quite clear it was that architrave and not another one that corresponded, because everything is exact to the navel. And sure enough, when Baril translated it, something to the effect of here the king is born, here life begins, the king is raised to maturity, leaves the temple crowned in glory, words to that effect, something of that sort.
Baril's translation of the ancient stone, with results exactly as predicted, was a dramatic turning point in Schwaller's work, opening the eyes of many other researchers.